Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we dive into a different Disney Plus offering and discuss its history, how it holds up today, and our general impressions. If you like the show, we would love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Joining me today, we have Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing good. Maybe the last episode with the holiday background here. It is the end of the season here. Maybe there might be one more for a Bond-related episode that'll still be in like that holiday window potentially. But I'm doing fantastic. It is a wonderful Thursday today. I got boosted. I'm feeling all the Microsoft, Facebook hormones going through my body. Having a great time. You know what I mean?
Of course, indeed.
Yeah.
And today is our last episode of 2021, last episode of anything for 2021.
That's true. Yeah.
And we're going to be talking all about the Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 1, Stranger in a Strange Land. So why did we pick it? Well, because of that SEO hotness, of course.
Yeah.
Book of Boba Fett being the newest Disney Plus show in our timelines, the newest Star Wars thing in our timelines. Of course, it made sense to try and hop on that for this first episode. Whether or not we, revisit this one like we did with Hawkeye last week, last week. We will see. But it also serves as a nice little coda to this year where we've had a ton of Star Wars stuff because we, of course, did have our Summer of Star Wars earlier in the year where we went through and for that D Plus show watched all of the Star Wars films, including the Empire of Dreams documentary. We watched, we did an episode on the Bad Batch. We did episodes on Visions, Star Wars Visions. Wrap up here with the first episode of the Book of Boba Fett. This first episode has a runtime of 39 minutes. In the Star Wars TV timeline of things, we had The Mandalorian Season 2 that ran from October to December of last year. We had The Bad Batch that ran May through August of 2021, earlier this year. We had Visions, as I mentioned, that came out in September, just kind of all in one burst. And then now we have the Book of Boba Fett running from end of December here into February of 2022 over the course of 7 episodes. Following that, in the queue, we don't have hard and fast dates for these yet, but we still have the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. It seems to be next up on the block there in 2022, as well as Andor, the series centered around the Cassian Andor character from Rogue One. The roll call here. This episode directed by Robert Rodriguez.
Absolutely.
Who's known for many a thing, including the Mexico trilogy, aka El Mariachi, Desperado,
Love
and
it.
Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
One of my favorite film trilogies, actually. This predates That Nerdy Site. In fact, myself, Jarrett Green, and Christian had once talked about doing a Mexico trilogy limited series podcast at one point in time because we were all such huge fans of that trilogy of films.
Well, there you go. He's also directed From Dusk Till Dawn. I did not know that he did The Faculty. That was I was like, I remember watching that like once in high school, maybe, I don't know. Of course, Spy Kids, as well as Sin City, Machete, and one of his more recent ones, Alita Battle Angel. We have the writer of this series here, Jon Favreau, picking up writing duties again, basically after The Mandalorian. He had also, of course, written Swingers and Chef. And he will also be writing at least a couple episodes of the Rangers of the New Republic. So Jon Favreau just getting some of the keys to the castle in the live-action Star Wars Disney Plus shows. Alongside, of course, Dave Filoni doing a lot of producing on these projects. But yeah, Jon Favreau, the writer on this one. The starring, we have Tamura Morrison, of course, returning as Boba Fett. He's been playing Django / Boba Fett / assorted clones like Commander Cody and stuff since Attack of the Clones in 2002. We have Ming-Na Wen returning as Fennec Shand. Ming-Na Wen, of course, iconically Chun-Li from Street Fighter, Mulan from the animated Mulan film. She was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She made her debut in The Mandalorian Season 1, and her Fennec Shand character also appeared in The Bad Batch in animated form. We have Matt Berry as the not protocol droid that they have, UK2B. Matt Berry, previously from projects like The It Crowd, Toast of London, What We Do in the Shadows, the Matt Groening Netflix animated show Disenchantment. And because I always have to give a shout out to Community when I see it, he was also the grifting professor in like one episode of Community where they take a class in grifting. So we have David Pasquessi as Mok Shize's Major Domo. He's previously best known for roles in Veep and the series At Home with Amy Sedaris. We have Jennifer Beals as Garza Fwip. Of course, Jennifer Beals best known probably for Flashdance, but also in The L Word and the Book of Eli film. And then Robert Rodriguez making a little cameo as the Trandoshan Doc Strezzi that comes to pay tribute in a very menacing and threatening way. He was the voice of that character in a little cameo. A little bit of trivia before we hop into what we think of the episode, and I know Logan has thoughts. In the galactic timeline, dusting this off from some of our Star Wars, basically we have two timelines, of course, going on in the show. The like getting out of the Sarlacc pit, getting it mixed in with the Tusken Raiders bit is happening in 4 ABY after the Battle of Yavin. Basically, like theoretically it is pre-second Death Star blowing up Battle of Endor stuff, but it's not completely concrete on where we're at in that timeline. And then the quote-unquote current day stuff that is occurring after Boba Fett and Fennec Shand took over from Bib Fortuna at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2. All of that is happening in 9 ABY. So basically a 5-year difference between like the flashback stuff we're getting so far and the modern day Boba Fett stuff. A couple little fun cameos. We, of course, have the return of Max Rebo, previously seen in Return of the Jedi, performing in Jabba's palace. He's out there still in the gig economy in Mos Espa,
still doing his thing.
Working in Garza Fwip's sanctuary venue alongside a guitar-playing Bith. They're playing a little riff on the iconic Cantina theme. And then I love this one because I'm a huge Disney nerd, of course. There is an RX series pilot droid a la Star Tours, a la Rex from Star Tours, out there acting as a croupier in Garza Fwip's sanctuary casino venue kind of thing, out there running a table, little RX droid. And then also just a little thing worth noting. Clearly we are in the Republic era. Here 5 years post the Battle of Endor, because they go ahead and give him a helmet full of Republic credits with the Rebel Alliance logo, paid in tribute to Boba. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in, Logan, because I want to kick this off with what you put in Slack, where you said watched Book of Boba Fett's first episode. Boy, I don't know on that, folks. And I didn't respond to it, but I almost responded. I had a draft out there because I had watched it probably, I had watched it basically the night before. And I remember watching it and knowing I don't know if disdain's the right word, but you very much think Boba Fett is a very overrated character. And I remember I was watching it thinking, oh, I can absolutely envision Logan rolling his eyes at that. And that and that. So I was not surprised by that being kind of your first response. But yeah, let's go ahead and elaborate. What did you think here of the first episode of Book of Boba Fett, Logan?
Yeah, so I think, obviously we did a summer of Star Wars. We talked a lot about Star Wars this year. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love the series. I think it's weird. I think the Book of Boba Fett's first episode feels rougher than anything in the Mandalorian's first season, right? Like it almost feels like they'd built up a lot of progress of just like production, I think, and like special effects and writing, and then like this kind of felt like a step backwards on that front, just removed from Boba Fett being a central character at all. Like it just felt like a bit rougher, and I think of like the fucking Mortal Kombat villain that popped out of the desert. He doesn't look great, I think. So just like I wanted to say that before we get into the stuff more story based.
I just
Yeah.
real quick off that a trivia thing that I didn't highlight, but touching on that like sand creature guy.
Yeah.
Where is it in here? Basically the trivia is that character design, the six-limbed creature that Boba fights in the desert is based on the green Martians of the planet Barsoom, aka Mars, from the John Carter book series by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Tatooine is cited as being inspired by Barsoom, and the creature is also very similar to the Spitapillar creature that appeared aboard a sandcrawler in the game Super Star Wars in 1992.
So I mean, like, that's interesting. I think it wasn't great, right? Like, I'm not out here to ruin anyone, like, thing, but like, I think it was weak, right? I think, first off, let's just get the elephant out of the room right out of the gate. It's always going to be stupid that Boba Fett escaped a Sarlacc pit, right? Like, and we can all accept that. And like, if anything, I appreciate the fact that they were sort of aware of this fact of like, how do we get this out of here? Let's just do it in like 30 seconds and be done with it. And like, I don't think they'll pretty much ever address it again. They'll just be like, we did it. He's out of it. Don't worry about it. It's a dumb thing. Yeah.
He comes to, he shoots himself up with some stormtrooper oxygen for some reason, and then just basically flamethrowers his way out of there and crawls his way out. Which is even that's like a loose homage to kind of how it was introduced in the like expanded canon
universe.
Like I think in the expanded universe, if I remember what I read correctly, it was like he psychically tricked another person that was down there being slowly digested into like blowing themselves up, and then kind of used that as like the escape hope, but it's still like he very much had to like crawl out of the dust and desert. It was so that imagery in particular is a definite callback.
I don't know if you saw it on your timeline as well, but on my like Twitter feed, I saw someone like sharing the clip of Patton Oswalt from Parks and Rec, basically describing like a Star Wars story, and it is this exact scene. It is like Boba Fett like a fist like punches out of the dirt and like crawls out, and like it was like really funny. Like he was just grabbing the Sarlacc pit. It's stupid, right? And like we all are aware of this fact, and so I'm glad they just like got out of the way and we moved on with it. But I will say, if you'd asked Logan circa 2012, we'll say, it's like right around like Lucas Disney kind of purchase thing. Like the two things of why like I always say as like the massive Star Wars fan I am, why I don't really like the expanded universe like kind of surrounds it, is because they did the Boba Fett crawling out of a Sarlacc pit, and it's ridiculous. And we can all say it's ridiculous. It's fine. And they brought the Palpatine back. And then like 10 years later, it's like they made both of those things canon. It's like, what sort of weird, bizarre world are we in? But yeah, that happened. Not great. And then we kind of get this like stay in that flashback timeline of Jawas coming over and like taking all of his armor and helmet off. And then the Tusken Raiders, like we said, grabbing him. That I guess I'm curious for your thoughts too, as someone who, I don't know, maybe likes Boba Fett more than I do. I think Boba Fett's fine. I just give him a lot of shit. But like, I think it's interesting what they did in terms of showing you Boba both, kind of on top of everything in like the crime lord section in like 9 ABY, and then also very much like at his lowest of low, right? Like should have been killed, got, out of the Sarlacc pit through whatever, Deus Ex Machina we want to do, and then getting like basically stripped down by the Jawas, getting made a prisoner by the Tusken Raiders. Like that dichotomy has the potential to be interesting, and I'll be like curious to see what they do going forward with it. But even in like I guess my biggest takeaway from the first episode is weirdly enough, what I've been saying for 29 years, which is like Boba Fett kind of sucks at his job. Like he's not very good. Like he gets surprised really easily in ambush and like the 9 ABY stuff, and kind of gets his ass kicked a little bit. Like it's interesting to see like him needing a back to tank. I'm sure partially from like what is going to be happening in like the past timeline. And then also just like it's interesting to see Boba Fett get made a main character, because we essentially have no sort of precedent for that, right? Like he's never been a main character in anything canon, right? He's always been a guy next to Vader in the background who says 4 lines in the entire original trilogy. In the prequel trilogy, like Django gets way more of a role than he does. He's a kid, right? And then in like the Clone Wars, he'll have like storylines kind of like co-centered on him and like Cad Bane or this kind of stuff, right? But like that was not his story, and this is very much he is at the forefront. He's this legendary thing. And so it's interesting to see him and how he coexists, right? And like this like moral compass that he has, right? And like the rules of like, I won't torture, I won't, I don't want to rule it of fear, I want to rule it of respect. And it's like, I don't know, that's not really what you were doing 2 weeks ago when you were like getting told to not like disintegrate people by Vader. So it's like a little weird, because they sort of have to make Boba Fett not the asshole bounty hunter he probably is, because you don't necessarily want to watch an asshole for a season.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's because I think there's an element of that is like the crime lord stuff that's happening now is 5 years after we saw him in Return of the Jedi, and it's in line with his kind of reintroduction in The Mandalorian last year, and so like I'm very curious to see kind of how they try and explain this new like moral code that he's getting, and because there's a lot of this episode is not particularly introducing new information based on where he gets reintroduced in Mandalorian. Like he gets reintroduced, or his armor gets reintroduced first, and we hear the tale of like the guy who bought it off Jawas. So here we're just seeing the Jawas get it off of him, which we kind of knew happened. And then he also, when he returns in The Mandalorian, he has basically a Tusken Raider gaffy stick that he's kind of using as a primary and a very tooled weapon. So him now being embedded with the Tusken Raiders like tracks with what that is. And so now I'm curious of like, okay, is that just going to be his next 5 years? Because effectively like the first reintroduction of him happens off screen in the first season of Mandalorian, where he walks up on a dying Fennec Shand and basically saves her life, and then like they come back into the fold in season 2. So I'm curious to see how much of that like middle 5 years we're going to see.
Especially there's only 7 episodes. Like that's a lot of time to kind of get through in 7 episodes.
And it's I will agree, I guess, that I'm not a huge fan of the split timeline as like a narrative approach in this context. Like it at least if it continues on like this. If it was just like here's a 1 episode where like while we're doing a few of these scenes, we're going to see flashbacks to kind of fill in the gaps.
That's how he lost his armor. That's how it became like a Tusken Raider thing. Yeah. Sure, now you got it.
But I very much kind of get the feeling that like the story with the Tusken Raiders isn't over at the end of this episode. Like it's like, oh, he's being accepted by them. Okay. But that's still very early on in that 5-year window that we don't know what's going on. So the fact that we're most likely going to be continuing this like split timeline thing really kind of messes with the pacing of stuff. In not necessarily the most engaging ways, but also in a way where I'm like, The Mandalorian in particular has left me like prepared for a slower burn, slower paced kind of storytelling. But yeah, even that over only 7 episodes, like, okay, well, we'll see how that plays out.
I'm curious what you think too, because for me, I actually found the flashback stuff more engaging than the present day stuff, right?
Mhm.
Like that, I mean, like, and to be fair, you know, if you, it's split in half and it's a 39-minute episode, so you're getting less than 20 minutes each thing, so it's like not a lot to kind of really base anything off of. But like, I wasn't particularly engaged with any of that, and maybe it's partially because like the modern day stuff felt like they were just like hidden a lot of things we had seen before, just like with Boba Fett there instead of Jabba Hutt, right? Like here are people coming up to like pay tribute. We've seen this scene in Return of the Jedi, right? And it's just like Boba Fett's twist on it, right? And it's like here is him going out and like Tatooine and being a crime lord, and it's like very different than what Jabba did, but still like, oh, I can imagine Jabba doing this because they keep referencing it every 5 seconds, right?
Mhm.
Like, so maybe that, whereas like the flashback stuff is at the very least very distinct and unique to him. So like I find that much more interesting, and also because we don't really know anything about Tusken Raiders, right? Like that's part of what makes them kind of cool, is they are just like this like almost mythical thing that exists in the Star Wars universe that like we have very little information on. And so getting a, I think, closer look at their world and culture is kind of interesting to me, and kind of exciting of like what we're to kind of see happen here.
Mhm.
And like I'm sure the present day stuff will be more engaging once we kind of get like potential rivals coming in and like that kind of stuff, and like learning who sent the like shield guards who kicked his ass.
Yeah.
Like that is, I guess, where that will pop up.
Yeah, I mean, there's very much there's an element of this. Jon Favreau, in a lot of interviews, loves talking about the idea of like he's most interested in exploring like the characters that you got the action figures for because they were all sold out of the Luke and Leia and Han action
Mm-hmm.
figures. And
Mm-hmm.
so getting kind of a story based around Tusken Raiders or something like that is something that like really appeals to him. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting. It like even as I was watching this episode, I found myself thinking, okay, well, we typically refer to them as Tusken Raiders and or Sand People, and I'm like both of those could be incredibly like derogatory terms just because outsiders don't really know what their like culture is, kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. So like I would absolutely be, and we had in I think season 2 of The Mandalorian. It might have been season 1 though. There's a scene where like the Mandalorian basically like is communicating with one of them through like sign language kind of, and talking to them. And so like communicating with them in a way that's not kind of like the sound effects that just are iconic from A New Hope and stuff. And so like I'm very intrigued by that. And then we got a little bit more, we got more in early season 2 of The Mandalorian, where basically like the townspeople and the sand people kind of like team up to take down a crate dragon. So they clearly have like wants and needs and whatnot, and it'll be interesting to see how much we get of that.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, is this just a step in Boba Fett's journey?
Yeah.
As for the modern day stuff, I mean, again, I think for the pacing wise of things, in part because I've seen like the trailers, and so I've seen them kind of like tease other elements and the like the conflict that's going to happen in the crime lord stuff. I almost wish that it had just been like, okay, like the opening of the episode is him in that Bacta tank and like reminiscing on his past, and we just spend the entire episode in the past.
That's what I thought
and
it was going to
start
be.
coming
Yeah.
back to like the present day at the end of the episode or into the next episode or something like that.
That's what I thought it was.
The
Yeah.
the split focus really does kind of like make it a little bit weaker, because
Yeah.
in the crime lord stuff, like there's this, especially in like the first sequence being like people coming and paying tribute, and like the first thing he says is like, did you get any of that? I don't know what that guy said, something about friendship. Wow, we really need a protocol droid. Like he's in over his head, and in a weird way of like, okay. And then like the other guy comes in and gives tribute, but also in a very menacing kind of threatening way. And then the major domo kind of comes in and basically like, we don't respect you at all. We didn't bring you tribute. We're expecting tribute from you.
Yeah.
And so basically, like Boba Fett killed Bib Fortuna at the end of the Mandalorian season 2, and has not done anything in showing us of like why he should be actually taking the mantle of formerly Jabba the Hutt, then Bib Fortuna, and now Boba Fett. Like it's a weird, like it'd be like if I just, I mean, it's almost to tie it into, one of our Disney Plus things. It's almost like he knocked Santa Claus off the roof and put the pants on, but doesn't know what he's doing in terms of being Santa Claus. And
it is,
yeah,
it's really bizarre. Like it is a really it's a really interesting, we'll go with, I think it's like the least loaded interpretation of this character, right? Like, especially you come in and, especially in like the present day timeline, where obviously we don't know what happens in like the 5 years in between, but from what we know as the audience, all we've seen is this man was the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy, right? And then basically disappeared for 5 years, as all we know right now, and then came back and is still like, oh fuck, that's Boba Fett, right? Like that is Boba Fett. Like he was off in another solar system maybe, right? And then now he's back here doing Boba Fett shit. He's a legend. We're gonna be like afraid of this man, right? Because all we've gotten in the original trilogy is the idea that this is a terrifying presence who will kill you and has no sort of more like hesitancy in doing that, right? And so to me, when I'm watching this guy, it's kind of like continually like yank his chain. I'm like, what is going on? This is such a weird. Do they not know who Boba Fett is? How to, like, and it goes back into like that weird thing we've talked about on the Summer of Star Wars of like people in Star Wars have such a weird memory on stuff where like they'll just forget what happened 19 years ago, and it's like, oh, the Jedi were like an ancient order. It's like that was not even longer than Law and Order SVU's being on the air. What are you talking about? What are you saying right now, right? And like Boba Fett, like they've like forgotten about him in 5 years. I mean, like what is happening?
To tie it into another one you love, like we still remember the first season of Survivor.
Right, yeah, it's burned in my mind, right? Like I'm not going to suddenly be like these like the mythical legend of Jeff Probst. It's like no, I remember pretty clearly, right? And like. And I was I was like 8 when that happened, right? Let alone if I was like a full-grown adult. It's like, I'm not going to forget the Jedi Order, right? And like, that is something that we've talked about extensively on the Summer of Star Wars. Like, Star Wars and its history works best when it actually doesn't connect to anything else. When you just like view each thing as like standalone installments almost. And when Star Wars tries to build out its lore, I think it gets weakened by the fact that it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, the original trilogy is like perfect if you just look at it as these 3 movies. And then the prequel trilogy, although not perfect, works pretty good if you view it as like, these are these 3 movies, and they're not related to like anything that's happening in any sort of other context, right? And like, the sequel trilogy doesn't work at all. That's a disaster. But like, most of Star Wars things work kind of viewed on their own. And then it's when you try to like tie all the webs together where it's like, oh, this suddenly becomes an absurd story. And they just keep forgetting everyone in like 20-year increments. And that sort of feels like what we're doing with Boba Fett again. And I don't know if there is like what the solution to this problem is, but certainly I think at some point in time we can say people have longer than like 10-year memories. We're not goldfish. And that sort of seems like what's happening here. And like maybe there will be
they remember Jabba, who hasn't been doing this for like there was 5 years where it was Bib Fortuna who took over, but even that, like that's a whole other like weirdness to it where I wonder if like we'll see elements of Bib Fortuna's time in the 5-year gap, and we'll kind of see Boba Fett like looking at that from the outskirts or something. I don't know. But yeah, it's this weird, like it is a weird like, oh yep, there's Star Wars forgetting its own internal logic of history again.
Yeah. Like, it is such a funny thing. And this is why I always say, like, you just have to, like, embrace the fact that, like, just don't be worried about the lore. It's, like, one of the only series where, like, you can't really be worried about the lore because the lore makes it actually weaker. More often it makes it stronger when you try to, like, bring it all together. Like, I don't know. I think it's an interesting interpretation of Boba Fett. I don't know if it's one that, like, I particularly vibe with yet. But I'm curious to see what they would like, where they're going with these 2 kind of parallel tracks. I think after the first episode, I am more of the persuasion that these are basically going to be two different storylines that we're going to get through probably at least 5 or 6 of the 7 episodes. Like, I don't think they're going to merge until pretty much the end of the season, which we'll see how that works, I guess, right? Like, especially with them only being around 40-ish minute long episodes, which is what I assume we're going to get. Like, it's not a lot of time to get in each storyline, right? Like, you're going to get 20 minutes basically with like each thing each week, and like that's not a ton to close a 5-year gap in 7 episodes. And yeah, so I don't know. The other like more superficial minor critique is, but like, I don't know, maybe it's not, maybe it's all tied into this, is that like every time Boba Fett isn't wearing his helmet, I find it immediately distracting and immediately puts me out of this, right? Like it is sort of like it's sort of like the same thing with like anytime the Joker doesn't wear his, like if you get in like shit with like the Joker like not wearing makeup, just being like a regular person, it's immediately like, well, this isn't the same person almost immediately, right? Like part of what makes Boba Fett is the fact that like you don't know what's going on there. You don't know who he is or what he looks like or what he like sounds like, really, right? Like he's just like this pure machine whose one function is like just to kill shit, right? And be a bounty hunter. And like I'd be more okay with it in the like past timeline of him not wearing his helmet because he gets like stripped of everything. Sure, like fine, whatever. Jawas can beat at Boba Fett, I guess. But like in the present day where he's like walks into like a fucking restaurant, like pops off, and I'm like, are you not trying to like convey? And it's like, again, such a weird thing of like, is he not care about it? And it just seems so different than the Boba Fett we know in 5 and 6, where like obviously we never see him without a helmet. That's part of his whole gimmick. And so like every time he did it in this episode, it was immediately just like, all right, like this is gonna be like a regular feature that we're gonna have for Boba Fett just not wearing his helmet because I don't love it. And it's like a small thing, but it's also tied into like the larger thing of like, this is not the Boba Fett that I think of when I think of Boba Fett.
Right. Yeah. I think there's an interesting element of that, especially when juxtaposed with the Mandalorian, who did not take off his helmet for so much of the first 2 seasons there.
Yeah.
And that was like part of his culture, where we kind of get the vibe that like Boba Fett isn't really Mandalorian in that kind of nature, so it's more
not
of a
Mandalorian at all, right?
And
it's just a clone.
Yeah, and we get so we get like that flavor of like, oh yeah, we only saw him very briefly timeline wise in episodes
Original
5 and
trilogy.
6.
He had
So
4
like
lines.
so yeah, it's the kind of thing like, you know, with the if he had the same screen time that Vader has, maybe we would see, you know, as much of his head as we see Vader's over the course of that timeline. Again, even that's not,
which is not
much,
a lot,
but
yeah, I was gonna say.
But so the other thing I want to highlight here, that I meant to look up earlier and forgot to do it, so I just looked it up now. Boba Fett, born or cloned in 32 BBY. This taking place in 9 ABY. He's 41 years old, effectively. Tamora Morrison, 61 years old.
61.
So there's a 20, like he is 20 years older than the character than we expect the character to be. And I would say there's probably an element of that too, is that like, oh, this is a weird, like, we're not seeing him like, and I imagine maybe there's an element of this that they're going to play with, that like being in the Sarlacc pit and being out there like burned by the sun or whatever, like took some years off of his life, and that's why he's kind of more aged and whatnot. But like it's still it's not a good explanation for that element of it.
See, I saw someone also, because I was reading like reviews about this after I read it, or not reviews, I guess like here's like interesting shit about the episode. And I saw someone talk about that as well. And I was like, did everyone forget the fact that like in episode 2 of Star Wars, they very clearly say like clones have like an accelerated like lifespan as well, right? And like his is different. Obviously, they go to say, but it's still like, oh, like what if it just like, you know, it wasn't foolproof and he like ages quicker because he's
sure. I mean,
kind of thing, right?
I feel like you would need to like they go out of their way to say like he is a pure
So that he's
clone,
not
that he doesn't
80
have
by
any
this-
of those,
yeah.
that he doesn't have the fast aging that the rest of the clones do and stuff. So he,
Troopers
like,
do.
he is, for all intents and purposes, Django's son, and is growing up at the correct rate. And based on, like, the timeline of Attack of the Clones, if he was born in 32 BBY, when we see him again
He'd be
in 22
41.
BBY or whatever, he's the right age for Attack of the Clones kind of thing. So yeah, he should still be 41. And if they were going to pull that to explain why he looks older, they would have to, like, really come in and, like, explain that in terms of the justifying that. And so I think I think that's as much of a leap as, oh, like,
They're both
the
silly.
the
Yeah,
sun,
obviously.
the Tatooine sun that he was out there in a few days for, and, like, we see him, like, burned and scaly and stuff like that when, you know, the Jawa are picking him apart, and when Tusken Raiders grab him and stuff. Like, I feel like both of those equally, like, yeah, I guess we can explain it away like that, but they haven't really given us a definitive one or the other. So
Also,
but
I
it
was
is still
doing
a weird aspect
Yeah.
of just, like,
This is a 60-year-old man trying to be someone who's just
Yeah.
got out of their 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I was looking too, because it bothered me the whole episode. I just want to double check, and I was right. His costume is different than it is in the original trilogy.
mhm.
And, like, both in small ways, and also, like, the, like, not green part went from, like, kind of a gray outfit part to, like, it is black now.
Mhm.
And I just don't think it looks as cool. That's just more of, like, a small thing, just as a personal preference.
Yeah.
But, like,
That got
I
introduced in the Mandalorian,
Sure.
in his, like, new attire when he got his armor back and stuff in the Mandalorian season 2. Yeah.
I think for me, my big thing with the first episode of Book of Boba Fett might be what my recurring thing is watching the whole, you know, remaining 6 episodes, which is this immediately strikes me already as just something where I'm like, how much do they have to say about Boba Fett, right? Like, what can you build out of a character who has 4 lines in, you know, 2 movies, right? And, like, what can you do with that character in terms of giving him a personality, in terms of giving him these kind of dynamics, all this kind of stuff that still works with who that original character was? Or maybe they don't care about that. They're going to do whatever they want to do anyway. But either way, like, I think it's such a tricky situation, and it feels like one that is sort of a lose-lose in some ways, right? Like, most people who really like Boba Fett are fans of the original trilogy, right? Probably either group of those movies or, you know, love them for whatever reason. If you watch the prequels, he's not really in them. Like, he makes kind of like that came in episode 2, but that's about it. And then he's like pops up sporadically in the Clone Wars for a few episodes, and isn't in the sequel trilogy at all, obviously. And so for me, I watch this and I'm like, if you grew up watching the original trilogy and you watch this isn't really that Boba Fett at all, at least so far. And so it's like a weird thing for them. If you watch the prequels, you don't really care about Boba Fett. And so, like, I'm just sort of confused who this is for at this point in time. And again, we're doing this based off of a 39-minute episode, so obviously there's a lot left. But, like, it seems like a weird show to pitch while also, like, trying to reinvent this character into something else. Because ultimately, you know, my looking into the crystal ball future of the series is they're going to make Boba Fett into a hero. Not an anti-hero, but, like, mainly just a hero who, like, is a crime boss kind of thing. But, like, crime boss and, like, very loose, like, I don't, you know, kill innocents and I don't torture and I, you know, I want people to, like, love me and not fear me and, like, all this kind of stuff. Like, he's basically just going to be a good guy who, like, makes money from, like, gambling kind of thing, right? Like, I imagine it's going to be, like, a thing where, like, he, like, heals, you know, the community with, like, the Tusken Raiders and, like, the regular people and, like, this kind of, like, and, like, that's all fine, I guess, but, like, is that really who Boba Fett is? Like, based on what we've seen of him in the original trilogy, like, that doesn't seem like the kind of shit Boba Fett would care about, right? And, like, I'm sure what we're gonna get told is he had this, like, you know, come to Jesus moment after everything that happened to him at the end of episode 6 and, like, coming out of the pit and getting his shit taken and being with the Tusken Raiders. They've, like, changed him. Like, he's like Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai, right? Like, he's this experience of other cultures has changed him. I'm like, that's fine, and maybe it'll be done in a really nice way, and I will buy into it at the end of the episode, like 7. But right now, I think they're just going to try to make Boba Fett a hero because we can't have like bad guys who are just bad guys, really. And like, I don't know, like I'm kind of just okay if Boba Fett is just kind of a shitty bounty hunter dude, and that's like kind of his gimmick, right? Like that to me is like I guess what I'm saying in the end, like the Too Long Didn't Read, is I'd have been much more excited about a Book of Boba Fett series that is just him being a bounty hunter and like taking contracts and like killing people. I'm like, there are certain people he will and won't kill still, but like it's more just like, yeah, like he's a bounty hunter. Like give me like Boba Fett the Hitman TV show, right? Versus give me Boba Fett the crime lord who's not actually going to be a crime lord and is mostly going to do good stuff. Like that to me is less appealing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think in terms of who is this show for,
that was a lot, I know, but
yeah, no, there's like obviously we've talked about this a lot. Like there is a fan base of that love the Boba Fett from the original trilogy because of his cool look, because of his gadgets, his gear, and all that stuff, and who kind of overlook how he goes out very easily or whatever, and
it's great,
and got really drawn into the idea of him as a bounty hunter. That I mean, he's the guy who was able to get the one over on Han, so that means just inherently, okay, he's got to be some kind of cool and clever, even if he's not portrayed exactly like that. It's people make do build up more in their head, especially over the 30 years of
and the expanded universe.
An expanded universe stuff,
right? Making him like a badass.
And then I think, much like Dave Filoni has done with a lot of kind of rehabbing of lesser favored elements of Star Wars, most notably maybe like the Anakin Skywalker character because of Clone Wars. I think they kind of did that a little bit with reintroducing him in The Mandalorian. And I mean, I always talk about the idea that when he gets reintroduced in The Mandalorian and kind of comes out and takes out a whole bunch of stormtroopers with his gaffy stick and with like his gun and stuff like that in the armor once he gets the armor back. And I remember seeing that and being like, this is the scene, this is the fight scene that justifies the love that people have had for this character for 30 years. Like, this is the coolest thing this character's ever done, in the same way that like the end of Rogue One is realistically the coolest thing that we've ever seen Darth Vader do. So I, like, it very much, it was that moment for Boba Fett. And I think there's just like name recognition cachet around that character that they can have fun diving into. Like, I mean, there have long since been rumored stories of like 1313 as like, let's tell an underground, crime story in Coruscant, or in, talking about kind of the underworld of Star Wars. And this very much feels like we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it in Coruscant and stuff, but we'll do it on Tatooine, another iconic location of the Star Wars universe. And so it's going to be easier to do that kind of storytelling with a point of view character that people can already get behind, or that there's already an audience behind. And so, like take Boba Fett and just kind of like plop him into that story. And I think there's a large element of how much of this season can we judge based off this first episode.
Sure.
I don't think we can effectively judge the entire season, but this particular episode wasn't the best start for trying to tell that story, I think. I think we're both kind of on the same page of that, just because of pacing stuff and all that stuff. So
I think there's also right an element of, we didn't pick what the first episode was, right?
Right.
They chose how they want to introduce this, and this is what they gave us, right? And so, judging off of what they've given us, I think this is a weird start, right? And I think you agree, right? Like I'm definitely curious, right?
I mean, what this episode doesn't have compared to like the first episode we ever got of The Mandalorian is first episode of The Mandalorian ends with Baby Yoda,
the
child Grogu,
and
and that surprises everybody, that takes everybody by storm,
Yeah.
like that wins the internet immediately.
This
And
has Max Rebo.
this has Max Rebo pop up.
Not the
this
same.
this does admittedly have a similar like father-child vibe. The child is just a Tusken Raider, a faceless Tusken Raider that we can't really identify with. And there is an element of like, oh, they definitely are doing that trope a lot right now. Like, because the Bad Batch does it too effectively, where it's like gruff clone troopers and Omega, you know, the young girl that basically gets brought in and has to become, they all have to become like paternal figures to this little girl. And so like they're really like hammering home the like father son or father and child kind of like relationship. At least that's a potential that we're going to get in this, in a very interesting way. And so yeah, I think this, like if the first episode of Mandalorian didn't have that surprise reveal at the end, it would have been a very similar episode to what this is, of like, okay, guy we don't really get a good sense of because he's hidden behind a mask the whole time. He's just kind of being a bounty hunter. He has a cool fight scene with the IG droid in that sequence, which I would say I would say that was cooler because of the IG droid than the sequence we get here of him and Fennec kind of like attacked in the streets. But then again, going to like the Jon Favreau-ness of it, having like Gamorrean guards come save the day is very much that like, here's the toy that your big brother didn't want to play with, so I'm gonna play with it, and I'm gonna bring in the Gamorrean guards, and they're gonna help me in this fight. And so yeah, it's I think this just didn't have like a big earth-shattering kind of reveal in the way that The Mandalorian did. Otherwise, it's, I would say, probably kind of on par with like the pacing of that first Mandalorian episode.
I think I'm not unopposed to that theory. The two caveats I would add is The Mandalorian's first episode was allowed to just go instead of having to bounce back and forth between two timelines. So it could build up to that moment in terms of pace and momentum. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I'm very curious. I love, this time period of Star Wars. Obviously, is like my favorite time period, right? The kind of the original trilogy era. And I'm definitely down to see more of like the Tatooine criminal underworld aspect of it, if we get a lot of that. But I think it is definitely fair to say this was, a bit of a letdown of an opening episode, especially again, like if this was like Scrubs or The West Wing, right? And they're doing like 22 episode seasons. First episode's not that great, whatever, right? We get a lot of other cracks this. And when the season is 7 episodes, it's a bit more like, all right, like one's not great is a bit more of a like detriment to the season as a whole.
It's also, I would say in that same vein, it's also very surprising that like with a lot of the Disney Plus shows recently, most recently, for example, even Hawkeye, they released 2 episodes on that first day to kind of like wet your whistle a little bit and give you a better sense of the story that they're trying to tell. And the fact that they only gave us this one episode and it wasn't the strongest episode to kind of like
that's a really
cement kind of like okay, now I am going to want to come back week after week to see how the rest of the story goes. Like I would be very curious to see like, okay, people who check this out and were like, maybe I'll just wait until the whole thing's done and bounce off this for the next 2 months and then come back in February and check out, just sit down and binge the whole, 7 episodes.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Were there, so, we kind of just talked a lot in generalities and stuff. Were there any favorite moments that you had in this, Logan, despite kind of the criticism? Anything that really kind of popped out or that you did find yourself being like, oh, that was a really cool beat or a cool moment or something like that? I mean, I'll jump in if you want to think about it for a sec. I will say that especially on a rewatch, because of the slow pacing and a lot of like low dialogue scenes and stuff, there's another opportunity I think for Ludwig Göransson to really shine with the music, which still feels it doesn't have the same immediately catchy vibe that like the Mandalorian theme did, and the themes that he kind of plays with throughout don't they still feel otherworldly and galaxy far, far away like, but they also, much like in the Mandalorian, feel unlike stuff in the John Williams repertoire and stuff like that. And so I think that was a fun like new flavor, and continuing kind of to play in like here's what this show's soundscape is going to be like. And I'm very intrigued by where that's going to go.
Yeah, it's a good point. I would say there's nothing that I loved, right? I don't think there's anything great in particular in terms of like favorite parts. You know, I do really like Max Rebo. Right? Again, like any like Jabba's palace scene is dope in Return of the Jedi. Don't listen to the haters out there. It's a great scene. It's super weird and alien and like strange.
I mean,
and, like,
yeah, realistically, it was just missing. He was missing Sice Noodles there backing him up. Oh wait,
yeah.
Now I'm trying to remember. Does she get like dropped into the pit? No.
One of the dancers. One of the dancers does. So like that's cool, right? And like that's something that I've always said. You know, we did a whole podcast about this. Go listen to it. But like that's part of why Return of the Jedi is my favorite Star Wars movie, is that it is like so weird and alien and like creative in the first like act of that movie, and it's rad. It's why I love Star Wars, or a big part, right? And so I love seeing him there. He's just a goofy like blue just goof, and it's great. And I'd love to see more of that, right? Like I would love to see them get more alien and more kind of weird in Book of Boba Fett, like that. I think this is a series that can really play around with that, right? The fact that there aren't really any sort of law and order here means that you can kind of cross paths with a lot of different characters and species, and so that's something that is potentially exciting. We didn't really get it here too much, but you know, shout out to Max Rebo. The other thing I guess I would say that like was a positive, because I do think this is kind of a lackluster episode on the whole, is I said at the beginning, I do think the Tusken Raiders stuff has the potential to be really cool, right? Like I think we just kind of got like a very small tease of that here. And it very much could end up being not that great. Mm-hmm. If it is just like The Last Samurai, but Star Wars. But the Tusken Raiders are really interesting because we don't know a lot about them, right? And like it's sort of this weird thing for me where we're at this point in Star Wars where I think the people in charge of Star Wars are in a very like fan servicey kind of mood right now. And that's both cool and also really not at times, depending on the circumstances. And so like, I would love to spend more time with Tusken Raiders, but I don't want to know too much about them still too, right? Like part of what makes them cool is the fact that I don't know a ton of, like, they're just like this mysterious thing that like no one fucks with basically. And that's really interesting. So, like, I want to see more of them, but like up to like a certain point, right? Like, I don't want to know other stories, right? And like that's why Yoda is so interesting. Like we don't know anything about Yoda's species, or they don't even have a name, right? They're just like this like otherworldly thing, just like made of the Force, right? And so that's kind of part of what makes Yoda really interesting, or Baby Yoda interesting even. And I don't need to know where their home world is and what their species name is. Like, I don't want all this extra information about Yoda and Baby Yoda and Yodel. And so I think Star Wars is kind of in this point where like they're giving us a lot of information to the detriment of people at times. Again, I said something very similar about Solo, where it's like part of what makes Han Solo cool is that like he's just like a badass who comes out and is like, I'm just suave and charming and charismatic, right? And then we got the movie, which I think is fine, right? And I think something similar could happen to Boba Fett here, where it's like, maybe it turns out that when you've spent 40 years envisioning what Boba Fett can be in your mind, if you're a huge Boba Fett fan, anything you get about who he is and his story and all this kind of dynamics is going to be less cool. And I think we saw it a little bit with the prequels, and then we might get more of it here, right? I don't love Boba Fett, so like I can't really be disappointed in his backstory, but it is just a thing that I do want to bring up, is that like we're in this period in time in Star Wars where like we're getting a lot of shit, and I think it is very much a reaction to The Last Jedi. And this conversation is very fresh in my mind because I just had it with someone else earlier this weekend, where it's like, look, The Last Jedi has issues, and I've got critiques and problems that we both do, right? We each gave them on the podcast we did about it. And I think my critiques and everyone's critiques about it are totally legitimate for the most part, unless they're just like bullshit, like sexist things. But if they're not, they're totally legitimate and fine. But I will stand by the fact that like The Last Jedi was way more fucking brave and ambitious and bold and creative and original than anything in Rise of Skywalker. And that if you ask me any day of the week, would I rather have more Star Wars things like The Last Jedi or more things like Rise of Skywalker, I would easily pick The Last Jedi, right? Like The Last Jedi, even if I don't think it understood certain characters or got certain characters like I did, it understood, I think, you know, what Star Wars is about. And I think in a certain way, which is like being risky with stuff, right? And like being original and being really creative and trying something different. And I think Rise of Skywalker is none of those things. And I think the danger is they kind of did that and they're doing a lot of stuff, not like Rise of Skywalker in terms of quality, but a little bit like it in terms of like, here are fan favorite things and here's fan service shit. And like, let's like make more and more of like the expanded universe canon. And the caution I will say is, again, as the biggest Star Wars fan at that nerdy site, probably a lot of the expanded universe is really bad. Like, and none of it's like not creative. And I point to the Emperor coming back, and I point to Boba Fett coming back out of Starlight Pit. Like, those are bad things. They're not good ideas. And we've gotten both and made canon now. And so, like, I guess that's also what I would caution is that, like, this is a long way to say I liked Max Rebo and the Tusken Raiders, obviously, but like, it is just me saying that is sort of my worry going forward, right? And like, I think people are okay with it because like, we're going to get Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi and it's going to be rad and it is going to be fucking great. Like, there's no way it's not. Ewan McGregor's fantastic. But I would much rather have that be kind of the exception than the rule. And right now, that and shows like this, and even stuff like Mandalorian that they did, like certain fan servicey things that work well, but also it is becoming more and more like what the rule of Star Wars is on TV right now than these like cool exceptions to original storytelling we're doing. And so that's something I would just say.
Yeah. I'll circle around to that in a second because some thoughts kind of based off that. But I just in terms of like one last little thing I want to give a shout out to within this episode. I also like as much as I wasn't a huge fan of Boba getting like ambushed and the shield guys kind of, you know, doing a number on them. The chase sequence that Fennec Shan has kind of after the fact
is rad,
is cool, it's fun
great.
Parkour stuff. And Ming-Na Wen just continues to be amazing. Just in everything she does. So shout out to Ming-Na Wen.
I will say, since you brought that up, actually one thing, maybe actually my single favorite like one beat shot moment in the episode is in that chase when she tracks two guys down and just pushes the guy off the ledge and then just brings the other one as a captive.
Yep.
Great. Like, totally followed Boba Fett's rules. Alive.
Yep.
One is alive. That's what you want. It was so good. It was a really funny moment.
Yeah. To the broader conversation around like the fan servicey nature and stuff, I will say that like, especially because before they even announced Book of Boba Fett, because that got like the extra special like stealth release or reveal like at the end of Mandalorian last year, which was like a couple weeks or a week after the like big Disney Plus day where they announced like an onslaught of other new shows that they were doing, including Ahsoka, including Republic of Rangers of the New Republic or whatever. Like they have so many shows on the docket compared to like, you know, the 8 years where they were really only focusing on Clone Wars, or, you know, when that was off, Rebels, and then they brought back Clone Wars for, you know, another season or something. Like having so many different irons in the fire is very much like I'm a little wary of that, in the same way that like it's weird. I like, because people talk about like the burnout of like Marvel and the burnout of Star Wars and stuff when everything's happening. And like, I've not felt the burnout with Marvel.
I have.
I know, like, I know people have. I haven't felt it because I feel that, like, the storytelling is still at a quality where I'm like, I want, yes, please keep giving me more. I want to continue
Mhm.
enjoying that. Whereas, like, I think the storytelling with Star Wars over the last couple decades has been much more like hit or miss and
Sure.
hasn't had that consistent tone. So yeah, if
Sure.
you get a couple bad things in a row, you're like, stop giving me bad things. Take time and like
Focus on where it works.
make a good
Exactly. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly wary of the amount of projects they have. So
Mhm.
there's an element of like I appreciate that this year is this instead of the Mandalorian. They basically are like they took a
Mm.
year off of making the Mandalorian to make
Yeah.
this, and putting it in that context, looking at Obi-Wan's going to be a limited series thing, Andor is going to be a limited series thing, Rangers of the
Mhm.
New Republic, like it's almost like American Horror Story in that like
Mm.
yeah,
An anthology kind of thing.
it's yeah, it's almost like all of these shows rather than being like 10 different shows is a Star Wars anthology series, and each season is just season 1 is Mandalorian season 1, season 2 is Mandalorian season 2, season 3 is Book of Boba
Book
Fett,
of Boba Fett.
season 4 is Obi-Wan, season 5 is Andor, season 6 is Mandalorian season 2 or season 3. And if they can do that and do it well and tell like interesting self-contained stories that do like what Marvel has done really well, tie into other stories across the like I remember, and I stand by that, like my theory was Solo comes out, reintroduces Darth Maul to the
Oh
film
yeah.
audiences, definitely seemed like that was going to set up for Darth Maul
100%.
returning in Obi-Wan, back when like it was rumored that that was going to be a movie instead of a
Yeah.
series.
100%.
And so they were trying to kind of create like the MCU verse of
Yes.
Star Wars stuff, even though Star Wars is already a connected universe. Um, and but they were trying to kind of take those elements of the MCU and
Yeah.
kind of like cross franchises within Star Wars. And I think it just like it there were enough other problems with Solo, of course, that idea didn't like really take off. But I think they're probably now going to do it across this series, much
I
like
agree.
they reintroduced Boba Fett in The Mandalorian so that they could set up Mandalorian season 2. Even like some of the pilots and stuff that they introduced in End of Mandalorian seem ripe for, oh, we're going to pick up their characters' stories in Rangers of the New Republic. And so I think there and Ahsoka got reintroduced in Mandalorian season
Mhm.
2 to set up her kind of journey in her own series. So I think we're gonna see a lot of that, of kind of like the MCUification of Star Wars,
Yeah.
of telling these like self-contained stories a la WandaVision or Loki or Hawkeye, that will tie into somebody else's story that you're going to get 6 months from now. And I just hope that they can do that effectively and do that in an interesting way while still remembering, oh, hey, like we should really focus on telling an interesting story about this character. And so, it was a slow going and I think a rough start for the Boba Fett story here, but I'm hopeful that over the course of the next 6 episodes we get, if not a great story, at least a fun and entertaining story.
Mhm.
And either way, the people who have clamored for a Boba Fett centric thing will have their Boba Fett centric thing, and hopefully they're either happy with it or they're at least content that they got it, and then will not try and ask for another thing, a la like a Zack Snyder Justice League or whatever.
I think that those are really good points. I think unquestionably Star Wars is dealing with the ramifications of this, I can't even say post, but just like current MCU world that we live in, right? And everything is trying to be the MCU for the most part. While ignoring the fact that like Star Wars kind of had done this like 40 years ago. But I think that's sort of something that is also a critique or I guess a critique is maybe the wrong way, but like a potential worry I have is this kind of cross-pollination of all the different shows kind of feeding into one another, right? Like that can be something that's really cool and kind of be this really special anthology like you're talking about, but it also, if it comes at the cost of them being able to kind of tell their own standalone stories that can just kind of stand on their own, that's obviously not ideal. And then for the second thing, I would say I'm curious. I guess I'm curious what their long-term strategy is yet, if they have one, right? Because very clearly they had developed like 3 film trilogies they were going to do, and then they kind of like canceled all of those and like focus on like the TV series now. And so one of the critiques that we had on the Summer of Star Wars, and is a critique that is not unique to us, but to pretty much anyone who's seen the sequel trilogy, is they very clearly felt like there wasn't a plan. And it sort of feels like, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes at Star Wars, but it just seems like a really messy place at times in terms of like getting anything working cohesively for more than like a 2 or 3 year stretch at a time before like canceling a bunch more projects you announced, right? Like they should just do the things they're doing and do them, and then kind of really batten on the hatches, focus on that. And then if those are going successfully, then start doing more things instead of just keep adding things and then canceling things and then trying to add more and then canceling them. And like, I just want Star Wars to be done well, right? And I would say, you know, to when I mentioned that like I feel burnout on the MCU, it's less because the quality has dipped or anything like that, and more because, and I've talked about this a little bit, I think on podcasts, maybe not. Endgame was essentially the end for me, right? Like that's what I said. Like that was such a perfect ending for like this 11 film, LOL, this 11-year journey, like 20 plus films, that it made sense, and it was, I think, naturally also a good stepping off point if you wanted to kind of leave it for a little bit, and then you could kind of come back a couple years down the line if you wanted to as a fan, which is sort of what I've done, right? Like I've watched some MCU things since then, and a lot of others I've just kind of been like, I'll get to it when I do. I think the issue with Star Wars is that we're getting burnt out not because it gave us a natural point to kind of step away for a little bit, and then you can come back later on to catch these other things if you want to, and more because people are just getting a lot of stuff that is of varying qualities, and things that some people were excited about, other people weren't, right? And I didn't really flesh this out on the Summer of Star Wars podcast, but like one theory that I've been kind of percolating around for a little bit since we did that, and have just really been thinking about for, I guess, exactly 2 years now since Rise of Skywalker came out, is Rise of Skywalker and Last Jedi are basically 2 films for 2 different fan communities within Star Wars, right? And basically, if you like Rise of Skywalker, I'm going to paint with a broad brush because it's my fucking podcast. You probably don't like Last Jedi. And if you like Last Jedi, you probably don't like Rise of Skywalker. I think it's a fairly safe thing to say, right? There are exceptions, obviously, but for the most part, those are very different kind of films that have very different takes of what Star Wars is.
I mean,
I'm sort of in the...
There was also a very, like, I feel like the conversation around Rise of Skywalker was even more like the people who liked Last Jedi didn't like it, and the people who didn't like Last Jedi also didn't like it. Like, it was, Rise of Skywalker appealed to a very, and I won't say very, because again, I would argue there are millions of people out there who watch the thing and enjoy it fine and don't ever talk about it online, don't ever talk about it on podcasts. They're out there enjoying it and have no idea that there's like a toxic elements of fan base or whatever.
Yes.
But for those vocal people, there was like a lot of people that like on both sides of the Last Jedi camp that were like, this wasn't it. Like this didn't do it for either of us.
Yeah, because again, I don't love Last Jedi, but I can recognize this isn't it, right? And the thing I've been thinking about for a couple of years now is the Star Wars community, I think, has never really come back together since Last Jedi, right? Like it very much like it felt like kind of fractured into like 2 or more camps, basically in the wake of Last Jedi. Maybe 3 in terms of like loved it, hated it, kind of fell somewhere in the middle, right, on it. But for the most part, you were forced to pick a side. Even I've been forced to be like more like I liked it more than I didn't like it, and it took me 4 years to get there. But I picked a side in the end. But I feel like Disney chose the opposite direction. Disney had the chance to say, "This is what happened in The Wake of the Last Jedi. It's been an incredibly polarizing film. We're gonna make a film that's arguably even more polarizing, and we're gonna pick the side that didn't like The Last Jedi," right? And I think everything pretty much Disney's done since 2017 was Last Jedi has been to say, ignore that. Like, they've done pretty much nothing to like say that was a film that we stand behind, really, and a lot to say that we don't stand behind that and kind of ignore that, and we're gonna just like rewrite shit that happened in that movie in Rise of Skywalker pretty explicitly, like Rey's parentage, obviously. And then the TV shows that have happened since then, I think, I think Disney, not unsmartly, has mostly just stayed away from the sequel trilogy since Rise of Skywalker ended. But I think when they've been forced to do stuff, they've been more on the line of like, Rise of Skywalker is what we're going to go with. And it's only been 2 years, but it feels like a lifetime because of everything that's happened this 2 years. But like, I'm curious to see the long-term consequences of that, right? Because I think there is sort of a choice that we make, right? Like, those are two different visions of what Star Wars is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really only one is a sustainable vision. And I think the other is Rise of Skywalker. And I think they're kind of barreling down that as like more of what they want to do, which is fine. They own this thing. They spend a lot of money on it. They can do whatever the hell they want, obviously. People are going to watch the thing no matter what, because it's Star Wars. But I will say, just from a personal perspective, that is a much less interesting version of Star Wars, and one that I find less appealing to go back to, because it is just so, I think, counterintuitive to what Star Wars is supposed to be, right? And like, Mandalorian, even in its worst moments, is still 100 times better than anything in Rise of Skywalker, right? And like, I'd rather watch Book of Boba Fett Episode 1 a million times before I watch Rise of Skywalker again, if I have to, right? Like, it's pretty simple, right? Like, it's definitely better, but I think some of the issues that I had with Rise of Skywalker, I can also start seeing being repeated a little bit in terms of just like trying to reward people for what they have, wanted for a lot of time. And maybe the reason they never got them was because they weren't that good of things, right? Like fan theories and, like fan, like fiction almost kind of esque things, and like expanded universe stories that just percolated for 20, 30 years are becoming more and more part of like the actual official canon, and not just like George Lucas being like, sure, whatever, it's all fine. And like, those are very different things, right? Because like pre-2012, George Lucas, again, just a great like stoner uncle vibe, just being like, sure, it's all fine, it's all great, we love it all, it's all Star Wars, like everyone go find what you like. And now it's much more like, that is actually a canon thing that's happening, you can't like avoid it, right? In the same way. And like, before I could be like, Emperor Palpatine coming back to life happened in like a comic storyline that I'm never going to read, it's whatever, it's not in the movies, that's what I watch, I'm fine. And now it's like, well, now I can't avoid it, right? And Boba Fett come back, like, now I can't really avoid the TV series.
Yeah.
And so
it was the same thing with like, oh, Darth Maul came back in Clone Wars, but if you never really got into Clone Wars, you were completely unaware of that until he pops up in Solo. It's like,
until he came into like a canon thing, and it's like, what just happened?
Yeah.
Like that I don't know if we really talked about that enough on that episode, but just like how crazy it would be to watch Solo if you had no idea what had happened in Clone Wars. And be like, what the fuck is Darth Maul doing here? Like, and he's not dead, clearly.
He's got metal legs. What? Yeah.
It's like, what is going on?
It's definitely, and that's going back to like the MCUification of it, and kind of like that burnout or whatever. It is okay if you really want like all of the pieces of this puzzle. Yeah, you've had to watch like a whole swath of things. If you really want to get everything you can out of Endgame, you had to watch all of those 20 plus movies before it. And so it is the like, oh, if I want the the Civil War storyline of the comics, you have to read, you have to read this chunk of, X-Men, and you have to read this chunk of the Iron Man series, and you have to read this chunk of Spider-Man. And it does, like, all of that crossover stuff makes it so unwieldy. So like, as all of these things just continue to balloon out, absolutely, it gets more overwhelming and more kind of crazy. I will say to the Rise of Skywalker stuff and like Disney distancing it, I think it's still fresh enough that, and it's fresh enough / what Disney's focusing on being these Disney Plus shows is a lot in the same way of like, oh, you know, like after the prequel trilogy, everybody was complaining about the prequel trilogy for a long time, but there were the diehard fans that loved the prequel trilogy or whatever. And then like those people grew up and or I say those people grew up as if like, oh, the only people that loved the prequel trilogy were kids, you know, who thought that stuff was cool or whatever.
It's not, but like a majority probably, right?
I mean,
If there was
exactly.
like market research on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's. I mean that there is an element of like
there's a correlation of that,
and there's an element of like, oh, there probably are a not insignificant number of people out there that think the sequel trilogy is the best of the three. And it's weird to us who have grown up with both of the other trilogies and stuff, but you know, there's going to be some people out there that think that at least. And there are elements of it in terms of like just the breadth of diversity, I think that we get in that, and people being able to see themselves in Star Wars for the first time that they didn't get or didn't get nearly as much of in the first two trilogies, that I think there is merit in the sequel trilogy.
I agree. But I think only one is like unforgivably bad. The other two are fine.
But in terms of in terms of like what Disney's focused on now, I think it is focused on these series, and I think just like with the Marvel side of things, there's a distinct focus on since they release pretty much all these things episodically, the business plan is, we need to constantly have stuff kind of like to keep people subscribed, to keep people coming back and keep people renewing their subscription. And so I think that's why you get a whole bunch of like 6-7 episode run things, as opposed to, we're going to pour a ton of money into this movie that's going to come out and we're going to get like, you know, a hopefully pretty good return on it. And then we're not going to get money off of that so much anymore, versus like, or we're going to fold that into the monthly subscription of Disney Plus and stuff like that. So I think there's an element of that, the everybody going the subscription model, thanks to Netflix, has very much changed the way TV stuff gets created in particular. Like that, I mean, yeah, we grew up in an era where every season of television was 22 episodes or whatever. And you know, the Netflixification of things has turned and said, okay, like we don't have to do 26 episodes or 22 episodes of a thing. We can tell a story that, you know, might be better told as like a movie and a half kind of thing, but that doesn't make sense for a movie. So we're going to tell it. We're going to tell this story over 7 episodes and then it's done. And sometimes you get really, really cool stuff like that, like the Watchmen series, which is another thing in this whole like remaking a thing based off of an existing thing that has a diehard fandom kind of thing. Like it can be done really, really cool. But like we probably have a tendency to remember the times where it isn't done really, really cool, a la Game of Thrones. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of where this series in particular heads, and then as well as the rest of the you know, Disney Plus canon of Star Wars stuff. And then also, I mean, you'll get to see it you know, firsthand in a couple weeks. You know, you get cool Star Wars things at Disneyland now too, and kind of expanded stories there. And you know, who knows what the future holds in the video game space. Obviously we know, you know, a Quantic Dream game is in the works. But there's going to be and presumably another Jedi Fallen Order, of course. And so we'll get to, you know, there will never not be Star Wars stuff in our lifetime. It's just a matter of like, how often are we going to check in on that stuff? So
it's also what I will say to end on a upbeat note as well, is something that I typically remind people on Star Wars things, because everyone's so highly charged emotionally on Star Wars typically in any sort of conversation, is the most basic thing, but it's something that people always seem to forget, is if you don't like it, you don't have to consume that piece of content or media. You don't have to do it, right? Like, I don't like Rise of Skywalker. I probably am not going to watch it that often. Spoiler alert, right? Like, because I don't have to, and I don't want to, right? Whereas the original trilogy, I am going to watch the movies a lot, right? I am going to have my trilogy time I still do once every 3 years. I just binge them all in like a week, or not even a week. That's that joke, in like 24 hours, right? Like, because that's what I want to do. Those are the movies I love, right? Like, I'm going to watch the things I want to watch. And that's what I would also encourage other people to do instead of getting too angry, right? Is just don't watch the things or read the things or play the things if you didn't like Fallen Order because I don't know, that game's great. But if you don't like it, like, don't consume it. It's also okay. You don't have, people feel like they have like this like pathological need to like play everything related to the thing and watch it all the time. Like they're being forced to watch their least favorite things multiple times. You don't have to. No one's making you watch things you don't like or play things you don't like. It's okay. Just consume the things you love. It'll make your life way more enjoyable. I promise you. That's what I'll say on a nice note to end it on. There's a lot of good Star Wars content. There's a lot of bad Star Wars content. Find what you love. I think Star Wars is a series that is almost unique among like big franchises in terms of being one that almost anyone can find something to identify with and that connects with them. I think the kind of core themes are universal in their message.
There you go. So let's dive into the report card. We're graded from A+ to F. What do you want to give Strangers in a Strange Land, first episode here of Book of Boba Fett, Logan?
I don't think it's like an F. I would say it's a C-, right? Like, I think it is almost a definition of like, that was okay, right? Like, it's like mediocre-ish to like average to okay kind of range to me. And so it's like, yeah, like that was okay. It's also hard to judge it because we don't know what happens next, right? So like at the end of the season, I might revise that ranking to like, oh, it didn't get much better, right? Or it got a lot better kind of thing. But in terms of what we got for like, this is, our first impression, I would say C-.
Yeah. I mean, that like I landed a C for a lot of the same stuff of like, like I hope that the season at the end of the season as a whole, that it's a higher ranking
100%.
and stuff. But this as a first intro episode of this, of a character that, there is a lot of emotion and charge behind in any camp. If you are a fan of Star Wars, like they just didn't do a lot with it for me. It very much was a, okay, yeah, that wasn't bad. It's not an F, but it also doesn't like reach any super highs and craziness and great highs and stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of like in a middling territory, and I hope it turns around. And this was just a weird, like, well, we got to introduce this, so here's the introduction episode, and then we're off to the races next week or something like that. We'll see.
I'm glad that you said that. I did, because I do just want to make clear, like, I obviously don't want this to be like a failure of a TV series just because I don't love Boba Fett, or he's not my favorite character or anything like that. And I critique this episode. I very much want this thing to be a success. I want this to be a great season. I love Star Wars, right? Like, I only want good Star Wars stories. Just because I don't necessarily love the initial premise or this episode as we critiqued it, I think totally fairly, does not mean I want this to like not be good, right? Like, I think that is the incorrect way to kind of view things. I would love to be surprised and be like, this is fantastic. That's what I'm hoping for anytime I consume really any piece of content, but let alone one from Star Wars. So yeah, I'm totally excited to watch the next episode, and hopefully it's great.
There you go. A little bit of extra credit. Other suggestions, if you do like Book of Boba Fett here, Disney Plus is going to recommend, first and foremost, Under the Helmet, The Legacy of Boba Fett, a brand new 20-ish minute kind of look at the character and kind of its legacy. You also have The Mandalorian, of course, as well as the Disney Gallery Star Wars The Mandalorian, aka the kind of making of The Mandalorian, which is a phenomenal series. Good. Star Wars The Clone Wars, of course.
Also great.
Then the original trilogy, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And then lastly, The Bad Batch, the latest in the animated side of the Star Wars oeuvre.
Everyone go watch Return of the Jedi, because it's fantastic. It's such a good movie. And if nothing else, I'll feel the positive energy from across the world, wherever you are, if you watch Return of the Jedi. It just makes me happy.
There you go. Extracurriculars. You watching anything else on Disney Plus, Logan? In your time off?
I'm watching Get Back.
Get Back. Oh, that's the Beatles thing?
The Beatles documentary.
Cool. Mm-hmm. How's that so far?
They're long. It's exciting. They're basically all movies. because it's 3 parts. The basically like 2 hours and like 30 minutes for one episode. Like one is like 2 hours and 58 minutes, and then one is like 2:15. So like basically like 3 movies. But I mean, if you love the Beatles, I mean, even if you don't love the Beatles, I think it's like super interesting, right? Like the level of intimacy they get in terms of like the creative process for making music, just making any kind of art, I find really interesting as someone who also creates stuff. But especially as someone who, my favorite band is the Beatles. I mean, they're one of kind of the central pillars of my like creative life, along with Star Wars, for example. I find it endlessly fascinating, and I always enjoy getting reminded of the fact that Paul, John, George, and Ringo were all out of their or not even in their 30s by the time they broke up, which I also was reminded in Tick Tick Boom, that they were all out of their 30s by the time the Beatles broke up. It's always a good reminder.
Yep.
How much of like freaks they are, just absolute phenomenals.
I will shout out Encanto, which came out over the holiday weekend. And
I was watching like a making of on it.
I watched it back in theaters when it originally came out and really enjoyed it. And when they put it on Disney Plus for the holiday, I was like, yeah. So like I spent like Christmas Eve, I basically like watched it while I was every year my mom gives me a Lego advent calendar. And the last few years, it's basically been Star Wars themed, and this one was heavily focused on like Mandalorian stuff. So as I was like watching Encanto in the background, just kind of going through day by day and like building my little sets and stuff like that, and just kind of enjoying that. And then like I watched it like a couple other times, just kind of like in the background while I was working on other things, because music's really good and it's a very pretty movie, and songs from Lin-Manuel Miranda and just a great fun time. So I imagine we'll at some point down the line, I'm sure we'll do a Disney Plus show on that. But
I would love to.
Check out Encanto. Well, that is going to do it for this episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to talk about the Book of Boba Fett, Chapter 1. You follow Logan at Lefty Logie. Anything you want to give a shout out to, Logan?
Stay tuned for next week when we have a brand new series go live on youtube.com/thatnerdysite, where myself and Trevor will be going through all 25 Bond movies, starting from Dr. No. It will be releasing what more appropriate date than my birthday, January 3rd, which is Monday, and then going live on Saturdays, I believe we settled on afterwards on youtube.com. So look forward to that in just a couple of days, actually.
Yep. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will echo that shout out. We've got 4 episodes in the can already that are kind of basically going to be, it's going to be the first episode out there to celebrate Logan's love of Bond on his birthday. And then episode 2 will drop next Saturday. And then every episode will drop Saturday following that. This is a YouTube exclusive show, rather than, since this is going to be kind of a limited run thing, it didn't really make a ton of sense to put the money into a Libsyn feed for, however long that's going to be. Obviously, like we're only going to be doing the show for a half a year, really. So might as well just kind of put it up on YouTube for people to enjoy there. But yeah, go check out that show. Gonna be fun.
You can just listen to it. You don't have to look at it.
Exactly.
Just have it in the background playing.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Throw it on your YouTube app and just kind of
walk around.
Exactly. Enjoy a little jog. And, also feel free to join us and watch along as we go through that series.
Yes, please do.
From Dr. No to No Time to Die. Yes. Cool.
I just realized, peek behind the curtain, this week when we're recording one of the episodes where I was like, oh, they each are no's. I hadn't caught the fact that Dr. No to No Time to Die, and I was finally like, oh, hey, no,
I thought
going from no to no.
I thought that was very intentional when you added that into your intro for the show.
Just because it was the first to last, and then I was like, oh hey, look at that, they're both a no themed movie.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yep. Once again, you can follow everything we do over at That Nerdy Site or go to thatnerdysite.com. If you liked what you heard, please like, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy, be good to each other. Class dismissed, and may the force be with you.